today's new episode of Crawlspace, we speak with veteran investigative reporter David Scott. And David tells us all about the new season of his show, Interview with a Killer. Lance, what'd you think of this conversation?
Well, Tim, as you know, I love inviting new people on the show, making new friends of the show who are going to join again, and I'm sure David will be joining us again as he embarks on this psychological journey. This Interview with a Killer show is absolutely riveting, and it's very fascinating to hear him break down his experience, his process, and what he takes away from sitting down with these individuals who are convicted of, have admitted to, and sometimes haven't come to terms with the fact that they are killers, that they have done what David says is the ultimate betrayal of humanity for the most part. What did you think of it?
Yeah, it was really interesting speaking with David. He's an Emmy winner and, so accomplished. And then he comes out of nowhere with this show that is like right up our alleys. So, I'm very pleased speaking with David, and I loved doing research for this interview because the show is super cool.
And you can check out Interview with a Killer on Court TV's YouTube channel. It's out now, and we're sure all of you will thoroughly enjoy this.
All right, so please follow us on social media at Crawlspace Podcast or Crawlspace Pod. We're going to break quick for commercial here, and we'll be right back with David Scott.
Thank you to our sponsors. We are back with David Scott, host of Interview with a Killer.
Welcome to the podcast, David Scott. David, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you doing?
We're doing fantastic. It's so good to have you on the show. Honored, really, to have you on the show. And we were having a good laugh before we started this. And it struck me that, we can laugh and then so seamlessly go into what is going to end up being a very serious conversation.
Right. Well, it turns out, we humans are pretty good at adapting even to the horrors of life.
Exactly. I'm sure there are a couple people out there who might not know who you are. So for those very few individuals, could you fill them in on yourself and a little bit on your background?
Yes, I'm David Scott. I'm a career broadcast journalist. Most of my career was in news at ABC and on a sports news magazine on HBO, Real Sports with Brian Gumbel. I'm relatively new to the true crime genre. But the guy who runs Court TV, Ethan Nelson, and I go way back. We were part of the team that relaunched Nightline in 2006. And this show, Interview with a Killer, sort of came out of our heads as we were, brainstorming about what we could do together with our sort of combined skill set. So here we are.
Yeah, tell us about the show. What is Interview with a Killer all about?
We're engaging directly with the people responsible for the ultimate betrayal of humanity, murder. All the cases are very different. All the killers are very different. There's a great range of where they're coming from. Some are, falling on the sword, seem genuinely remorseful and bearing their soul. On the other end of the spectrum are people who, despite their certain guilt, are denying their crimes. And then all kinds of sort of shades of gray in between. And we try and sort of get inside their heads and understand the mindset and motivations behind their actions in the case. And so in effect, we're telling these crime stories through the lens of the antagonist. But the primary narrative device is the good old-fashioned interview and holding them to account. Because like everything else on Court TV, ultimately the show's about justice.
I have so many questions. I'll go to the beginning part here. When you were thinking about the show, when you were conceiving this show, the conversation had to include what good will come from the knowledge that we now have after we've talked to these killers.
Yes, fair question. We talk a lot about this. I was at CrimeCon a few weeks back, and this came up. The first thing I want to say is that I think reasonable people can disagree about this. There's some people that think that under no circumstances should we be engaging directly with the killers for the purposes of even television journalism. There are people who feel that way. My point of view is that in order to understand these crimes and these killers, we have to engage with them, and to fight this kind of crime, we have to understand it. Some of the answers are only going to come from the people responsible. So I accept that it's dark stuff, it's grim stuff. But I do believe that there is public value in advancing the journalism on these stories. That's kind of, I guess, what the claim that we're staking with the show. We're doing this out of a sense of journalistic duty. Watch my interviews, you'll see that they are an exercise in reporting and journalism. Our fondest hope is that we can advance the public knowledge about these cases. In most of these cases, if not all, I feel like we've achieved that. We've even had a couple of first-time confessions, and so to me that's important. As a journalist, frankly, I can tell you there's no greater challenge than sitting down with a convicted murderer and being on the clock. Usually we'll get exactly 60 minutes, and in that time you have to penetrate the spin and the defenses and hold their feet to the fire. It's a great challenge for a reporter like me. And every time we go out, we try and make the most of it and learn the most we can about these crimes and why they happened.
And why did you want to do this? Why did you want to speak to all of these killers?
Fair question. I spent my career interviewing everyone from the head of the Chechen Republic to professional athletes to politicians. I have sort of honed the investigative reporting discipline in a way that really like sort of lends itself to what we're doing on this show. A lot of people, they don't like to do the hostile interview, but I immodestly say I'm well schooled in it. I learned at the feet of the masters, people like Brian Ross, others in the business, and that's really kind of the niche that I occupied on Real Sports and sort of hard hitting investigative reporting. And it turns out that skill set is really perfect for this show. And so we, as a team, we try and promise the audience that we will, dutifully, boldly go into the nether world that is the Supermax prison, and ask the questions that you would want asked, if it was your relative who was the victim. And we very much, embed into the DNA of the show the victim's point of view and the survivor's point of view, because in every single case, because they're all about life and death, in every single case, families and communities have been changed forever. That's part of how we look at the show and how we approach these interviews.
It's a good segue to one of the questions that I had when you mentioned the families and the secondary victims of these individuals that you're speaking with. And I'm so happy that the title doesn't include evil or monster or something like that. And I feel like that terminology, classifying them as something that's almost fictional, diminishes the impact that they've had on the families. Was that intentional? Were you keeping away from calling it like, and no disrespect to anybody who uses these words in their titles, but interview with monsters, something
right.
They're simply killers.
Right. No, they're killers, and in this case, they're all not just killers, but convicted murderers. And we don't interview anybody for whom there are legitimate questions of innocence or anything like that. That's not what the show is about. I think we chose the title because it's pretty straightforward. It's also, kind of different from almost everything else in the true crime genre. We have the killer. Like a lot of these stories, a lot of the cases have been told on, various programs. Some of these cases are very old. We'll bring you face to face with the person responsible. And yes, they're human beings, which I think, compels us to have to try and understand what makes them tick and what made these crimes happen. So I don't feel the need to, characterize them as monsters. There are times where they characterize themselves that way on our program. There are times when they deny being such. To me, it's I guess more straightforward than that. The show is we're not hiding the ball. Interview with a killer. And the spine of the show is a hard-hitting interview where we hold the perpetrator to account for his or her actions, and then we just we let the viewer decide what they think about these crimes and these killers.
You're embarking upon a new season very soon. How long has this show been running?
We launched the show almost exactly a year ago. We've done 10 episodes. 5 aired last fall. 5 aired last spring, and this is the next set of 5 shows, 6 hours. The premiere episode is a 2-hour special, but it will run from October 25th for 5 weeks on Court TV. It'll also show up on Court TV's YouTube channel and website as well. So yeah, we're excited. It's going to be a really, I think, interesting season. We've gotten better at it, frankly. We've really dialed in our method and our approach, and we were lucky to have some really interesting cases. In almost every case, it's the first time the killer is talking. There's lots of journalism in it, a deep probing into the dark reaches of the human mind in a way.
Speaking of dark reaches, on season 1, you interviewed Tyler Hadley, and that is like such a story that gets under my skin in such a way that I can't quite put my finger on. What was that like?
That's an example where, the perpetrator just, really, I think, genuinely wanted to bare his soul. Tyler Hadley was 17 years old when, after a long sort of battle with mental health and with delinquency, he inexplicably bludgeoned both parents to death with a hammer. He's now 30 years old, looking back on his teenage self and trying to understand what the hell happened. Still baffled. The sort of spectrum of Interview with a Killer interviews goes from these people who expose themselves. I just have to ask questions to sort of, lead them there, to the other end of the spectrum where they have to be exposed. And in this case, Tyler Hadley really revealed himself. It's one of, I think, in a way, it was our vision for the show. They would really be allowed into the mind of the murderer. But that hasn't always happened. Often we have to sort of pry our way in, and through a lot of like spin and sometime outright just denialism.
Yeah, and I'm just going to bring it back to what you said earlier about understanding the killers, and that's, I think, why this story with Tyler kind of got under my skin, was because it wasn't like he was this like raving maniac. This is somebody who, right. And I don't want to sound cliche, but could have been your neighbor.
Oh yes, yeah. Or how about this? Your kid.
Could have been your kid. Yes.
Like a the teenage brain. And there's this condition that nobody's ever heard of. I didn't know anything about it, called catathymia crisis, where the person believes that the way to resolve inner conflict is through an extreme act of violence against somebody with whom they're closely bonded. Okay, that's like a psychiatric condition.
Yeah, that's incredible.
And when we read to him the definition of that, we didn't come up with it. It was actually one of the forensic psychiatrists in the case that diagnosed him with catathemia crisis. And when I read him the definition, it was like a light bulb goes off, and he's like, "Wow, that really seems to ring true."
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
Tell us a little bit more about how you prepare for an interview. Do you know what you're getting like before you get in there? And then I guess how much pivoting will you need to do in those 60 minutes to get out of that person what you need?
Oh, these are great questions. It takes about 100 hours to prepare for one of these interviews.
Wow.
We read every single piece of trial transcript. We review every piece of visual and audio evidence, the sentencing hearing transcript, the victim impact statements, everything that's in the printed record, the written record that we can procure. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less, but everything that we can get from, the public authorities. Then we conduct our own investigation of the person and into crimes, prior crimes that may not be reflected in the court, in the case record, because, often that evidence is inadmissible in the court of law. But here in the court of public opinion, we can get into all of that. And then, I kind of like meta script my questions. We try and sort of speculate about where the person might come from. We'll role play. I'll role play with the producers, different scenarios. What if he admits it? What if he denies it? What if he's just trying to diminish his culpability? All of which have happened in the series. Sometimes the producers will play me and I'll play the killer sometimes, and then we'll switch. So by the time I go in there, I really feel like I know everything that is knowable. That's not something that these people expect. so so in some cases, you know how it is. They've been sitting in prison for 10 years telling themselves this alternate narrative of what happened, and sometimes believing it. And so sometimes they'll come in with these elaborate, conspiratorial justifications for their actions, riddled with exaggerations and distortions. And because I have such detailed, nuanced knowledge of, their actions, I can unspin them pretty effectively. In and of itself, when it gets to that level of kind of antagonism, it's a revealing. It reveals a lot about about their mindset even now.
I mean, it's got to reveal a lot about your mindset too, because this isn't like, oh, go into my 9-to-5 job every day. You know what I mean? You must have an insane amount of adrenaline pumping through you.
Yes. Well, I'll tell you, for 48 hours after these interviews, I am useless, because it's just exactly what you said. Like, just the experience of walking into the environment, frankly, is extremely stressful. First, you go through the Sally port. That's like this kind of space between public freedom and incarceration, and there's like one door doesn't open until the other one closes. That's the port part of it. And as soon as you enter, you exit the port, you see a sign that says no hostages beyond this point. Every single prison has it, right? It basically means if anything goes sideways, you're on your own. There's no rescue. And then you walk into an environment where all the rules are different, where sometimes, 400 guards are responsible for policing 4,000 inmates, unarmed for the most part. So these are like combustible environments, and you can feel it. You can feel it. And yes, it triggers all kinds of brain chemistry, even before you sit down with the killer, right? And then that's a fascinating trip down the rabbit hole. By the time I get out, I'm literally useless for 48 hours. And the team and I, they usually only let three of us in. So it's our photographer, our producer, and myself. And we've sort of developed little, rituals to kind of restore ourselves after the interviews. But it is an intense exercise, and part of what I think, makes the show special.
Wow. Well, I hope this interview doesn't take 48 hours for you to recoup from, but I know it will for me. So you have like no earpiece then, like you're not talking to the producers. There's no pausing really. You can't, there's not enough people in there for you to communicate like that.
We're literally on the clock. I mean, and some states are stricter than others, but sometimes we're like literally on the stopwatch. This is a show where the interview is the show. You know, you can't kind of like, just like add some other element because this one didn't work out, right? So like it does feel like, the stakes are very high for us. It's, very often the first time the person is talking at all. It's a rare opportunity, as a journalist to be able to, engage that way. And so we want to make the most of it. It's a taped format, an edited taped format in the end. So, we do have opportunities to consult with each other. There's never enough time. I always kick myself afterwards. I should have asked this. Why didn't I say that? But, so far we've made the most of it, and the audience is responding. And so we're gratified that it seems to have found a place, in the world of true crime journalism.
What is the, I guess, most unexpected thing that one of these killers has said back to you?
That's a great question. In the premiere episode of season 3, we profile a double murder by a guy named Adam Curtis Williams of a retired couple from New Hampshire. He might be the most intimidating figure I've faced yet. Big man, covered in ink, and not just ink, but like warnings, not to mess with him. Scalp, face, ink everywhere. Really fearsome. It turns out, like, I mean, he's every, like, really your worst nightmare. And he has lived up to that image, losing count of the brutal battery that he's meted out to people both inside prison and outside. And I was not prepared for the extent to which he let me into his head. And it was the first time I was literally rendered speechless, as he was describing what he did to the victims and what he was thinking as he was doing it. That is probably the most literally stunning moment, so far, and you guys will see it in a couple of weeks play out. I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but it is that one is a remarkable, which is why we turned it into a 2-hour special. He really led us into his madness, and what a descent into madness it was.
Do you think that he did this intentionally to unnerve you?
No, I think in his case, he had started telling his story on Substack. And he claims, like many felons, to have found Jesus in jail. As part of that, he sees himself as atoning or trying to atone for his sins. Telling the story in his mind is part of that. Ironically, I confess that he was, to me, the most intimidating of the people that I've faced in this show, and yet he it turned out was more unnerved than me. Literally, like, I could see his hands shaking. You can imagine, like, he's bearing his souls, his worst sins. I'm grilling him about them, and you can kind of feel the vulnerability. It's a very interesting. It's a very interesting process, and in this case in particular, the first time I was left speechless, and man, just that one stayed. That one stuck. That one stuck with me for a long time.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
I'm curious, if you could go back in time and interview a killer that is no longer with us, who would you go with?
Oh, wow. That is a great question. um, Lee Harvey Oswald.
That is a great answer. Could you imagine what you could get from him?
I can't imagine. I can't imagine. It's actually it's actually really interesting to think about how that would play out. And I wonder if, like, I'm sure there's some, scholar out there that's written the book on him, and but in the broad public, we don't really have a sense of his his personality, what he, what he, how he presented, was he mild mannered? Was he aggressive? It's really interesting to think about that.
And he was 24. He was 24.
I did not
Like,
know
that
that.
always blows
I
my
did not know.
mind.
I would have said 40.
At least, right? He looks like he's in his mid to late 40s. I have to double check that every time we talk about him because I'm like, that can't be
Crazy.
right. Yeah.
That's crazy. Wow. Great question. It would take a lot longer than 100 hours to prepare for that one.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's some documents written about him that you might want to brush up on.
Right.
Just a few. Now, you also interview women in addition to men on this show. When you set out to record a season, are you looking like, okay, we need a couple of women for this season? And are there any differences in speaking with men or preparing for an interview with a woman versus a man?
We always want to have women in the season. We cast a wide net because there are a lot of filters we have to get through to get these interviews. In a way, the whole show is built on the booking operation, because not only does the inmate have to agree, but the State Department of Corrections has to agree, the facility has to agree. We have to be, lucky in that there's no disruption in the facility on that day. Or that the killer doesn't, our interview subject doesn't do something that puts him in confinement, or, there are just so many things that can, that can go, wrong in the booking of these interviews, so sometimes it feels like just getting in the door is half the battle. We've had our hearts broken lots of times where at the last minute, something happens and the interview can't happen. So we start with like who can we get? Are the cases interesting? Is their guilt virtually certain? Those are the main sort of criteria. But we always, look, women kill for different reasons than men in some cases. The statistics show that women. It's very personal. It's almost always very personal. Whereas, men, they kill for personal reasons, but they also kill in crimes of opportunity and robbery and, all that stuff. So there are some differences. It definitely, it changes my approach. I mean, each interview changes, my approach. For example, we interviewed Cindy White in Indiana. She's the longest serving female inmate in the state of Indiana. Her one and only crime was committed when she was 18 years old. She's now 67. She burned down a house that she was working in as a babysitter, killed an entire family, including, four sleeping children. She denied the crime for the first 10 years of her incarceration. Now she's a 67-year-old woman in a wheelchair. So I don't approach her the same way that I would Gary Michael Hilton, the national, forest serial killer, and then we've done some like relatively young women, 30-year-old women, who also committed crimes, very early in life, and reflecting very deeply on those crimes. I'm really proud of like the diversity of cases, crimes, and killers in our series, because I think it makes it so much more interesting for the viewer.
It definitely does, and it definitely takes people away from, all of them are not Ted Bundy. They're different, they're nuanced, they're unique, and you kind of feel for them. You do feel for them, and I think that's intentional, right?
Yeah. I mean, look, again, they're all human beings. Whatever else you can say about them, whatever else you want to call them, they're all human beings. The one thing that they all have in common is that they are all trying to live, with what they've done, and none of them have figured out how. At least so far. I mean, I've done 16 of these interviews so far. All of them are tortured by the irreconcilability, the permanent nature of their crimes. And that's the thing about murder. It is a uniquely permanent crime, not just for the victim, but for the family, and in some ways the communities. Those are things that we're like very mindful of as we conduct these interviews.
And you've also interviewed politicians. Are they scarier than killers?
Uh, Good question. Well, I think, I often feel like this series really started in the Republic of Chechnya, of all places. I was the first Western reporter to interview Ramzan Kadyrov in the Chechen Republic, in many years, and it happened to be at the time when he was purging gay people from the Republic, and so we have very confrontational interview about human rights and his human rights record. This is a man who, went from leading the Chechen rebels against the Kremlin to slaughtering them after having made a deal with Putin. That was in some ways, he's probably a mass murderer, not just a killer, or a serial killer. I mean, he's in a different category. But that's one that I think about a lot as this series plays out, and then I get more and more insight into, the mindset of people like that.
Well, super interesting, David, and thank you so much for joining us here today and telling us all about the show. We really appreciate it, and we will definitely be checking it out when it airs on Court TV very soon here in the month of October.
Really appreciate it. It's great to meet you guys. Congratulations on your own success, and yes, October 25th. The new season premieres, and then it'll go for 5 weeks after that on Saturday nights.
Amazing. Looking forward to it.
Appreciate you guys.